I'll always hail the end of Ubisoft. Look, it's one of many entertainment companies that have just decided to disregard the consumer, right? And to try to go around the consumer to make its products. And obviously, it uses, you know, ideology as a shield. These things that, they don't make the product better, but if anything, they're just leverage they use to attack the consumer and berate the consumer for not consuming product. Right? Like, remember, you guys shut up and consume product. But Ubisoft is one of, I think many companies are going to be in the situation as Ubisoft, right? But Ubisoft is what people are bringing up because it is absolutely clear what's happening to Ubisoft. Like, if you don't want to make a product for the consumers and just for the shareholders, that's okay up until you see the shareholders freaking out because your products are failing. And now the shareholders are effectively waging war against Ubisoft. And no one cares for any of their products. And they have IPs that they just squat on and do absolutely nothing with. So, I like Legendary Drops. He has some interesting content. I'm not signed in. But, let's just give it a watch. Just give it a watch.
Today we talk about the fall of Ubisoft. Look, I don't like to hold my tongue. I like to speak my mind. And from my perspective, when I see a company that has failed to deliver quality to their customers, that have completely ignored any criticism, whether that's from the industry itself, from critics, or their fans, they get what they deserve. And in the case of Ubisoft, this is a victory for consumers. This is exactly what we want to see, because if you're not working for us, you're working against us, and that's what they've been doing for years.
Yeah, and again, the company holds no power, right? The consumer holds all the purchasing power and all the power of the company. The company only has really the power to meet the consumer's expectation. But again, what we see in the past couple of years is companies just refuse, at least in the entertainment industry, refuse to give the customer what they want. They refuse to give gamers and their consumers what they want. And the consumer's just turning away. Like, people vote with their wallet and they're voting against these companies. And it's odd because then they'll, you know, utilize their bots and their shills to go after the consumer, and they'll berate you for not consuming the bad company's bad product. Right? It's this odd marketing tactic, and they try to appeal to the majority, like, oh no, we are the majority, you are just a couple of trolls on the internet. But the numbers, like the sales, don't, uh, they just don't reflect that, right? The fact is, nobody's buying the product, the stock of Ubisoft is failing, the shareholders are even going to war with you, and it's like, at what point do you decide, okay, maybe we should give the consumer what they want? Like, maybe we shouldn't pander to this mythical audience that doesn't exist. I mean, there's a couple of ideologues that claim to be gamers, and they claim this just to impose on everybody else, but they don't buy the games. Again, the numbers don't show.
So, when you're a company that's as recognized as Ubisoft, one of the most recognizable names in all of
Yeah,
gaming,
they're
they're
the
a
big
cornerstone
boys.
of AAA, you're going to have some ups and downs, but over the last few years, they've had a lot of downs. They've been digging a grave that I don't think that they can escape. Lack in quality, repetitive games, lack in player interest, controversy. Now their own investors are calling for their leadership to be ousted and for the company to be sold.
Yeah, and I know, like, they were dipping for, and I think Ubisoft is also is spread thin. Like, they're working on so many products, they have their hands in so many things. Like, I know Rainbow Six Siege still gets updates. They tried with Star Wars Outlaws and it failed. They're moving to Assassin's Creed Shadows, and I also heard there's an Assassin's Creed texts coming out, which has to do with witchcraft, and obviously I also heard there were ideologues on that. Like, again, people who are hired to make the product worse, in my opinion. You know, the consultants, so they try to push a message. It's like the ideology is the product, and they just use the game as like a VTuber to push it. And the problem is the consumer doesn't want this. Like even if the consumer, like I 100% believe there's consumers that 100% agree with the ideology, but they don't want it in their games. You know, they don't want it, you know, in their product. Like, they play games to escape reality, not to be reminded, and this is 100% fair. Again, you demand people's fucking money, right? At least you can meet their expectations. And the problem is Ubisoft doesn't want to do that.
How do you get yourself to that point? That's what I want to answer today. There's a lot of other companies that are traveling this road to ruin, and I want this to be a lesson to all. So, let's talk about the rise and fall of Ubisoft. As of recording this video, Ubisoft stock just hit a low that they haven't seen in over a decade. Their stock prices fell almost 84% over the past few years, and with recent releases like Skull and Bones, Assassin's Creed Mirage, X-Defiant, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, Star Wars Outlaws, and the upcoming Assassin's Creed Black Shadows, nothing seems to be able to pull them out of this death spiral, no matter how many games they release in quick succession.
Yeah, and again, they had Prince of Persia, and people wanted them to do something with Prince of Persia for a long time, right? But then they turned a three-dimensional isometric combo-based fighter, like melee fantasy fighter, into this 2D side scroller, and it's like, okay, it's called Prince of Persia. You don't play the prince, and it doesn't take place in Persia. Yeah, and for some reason the prince gets kidnapped, because you can't have the princess get kidnapped, because again, they hired the consultants, they hired the ideologues, they hired people who only care for ideology. They care very little about the product. You know, they have the odd African American haircut that I don't see a single African American have. It's like, it's the difference between the mental illness haircut and, you know, just this, I guess, perceived stereotypical African American haircut that no African American actually wears, right? And it has rap music in it. Like, what the fuck? Like, is the music to, you know, portray Middle Eastern culture? Well, but you can't do that because, again, that's Orientalism. So a bunch of fucking Americans who went to university, had never traveled the world in their fucking life, believe they know better than people that actually live in the Middle East, and they will impose on any product that portrays Middle Eastern culture. Like, this is the problem, right? Now, what's happening with Ubisoft, well, I mean, their issues, but the symptoms, right? Like, the Ubisoft is just a symptom of a greater issue. And the greater issue is refusing to meet consumer expectation.
When a company releases 6 games over the course of a couple of years, that's usually the sign of success. But in the case of Ubisoft, each release seems to be taking them one step closer towards the brink of collapse. So how did this happen? Why did this happen? How does a cornerstone of the AAA industry fall this far from grace? Well,
oh yeah, Skull and Bones was just handed hundreds of millions of dollars in grants just to be made. So didn't actually matter if the product was good. It's the fact that, oh, well, I guess we were given this money, so I guess we might as well make it. And we all know what happened with that game. I forget that game even exists until someone actually points it out.
Well, to answer that, we need to go back and look to where Ubisoft came from, where it peaked, and where it fell. Ubisoft, like many developers, cut their teeth on PC games in the late 80s.
Yep.
A game company initially started by the 5 Guillemot brothers, who still own and operate the company today, initially focused on games distribution as they slowly moved into games development. Titles like Zombie, Prince of Persia, and a few others helped them to gain a foothold, but it wasn't until 1995 that the company would make a name for itself.
And, I mean, many companies started off, like many AAA gaming companies started out as just a couple of dudes in their mom's basement that just wanted to make a game, right? But what they've become is just over bloated corporations that, again, I doubt any of the older people that were there, but to begin with, well, I guess in Ubisoft's case, the Guillemot brothers are trying to take back control, but I mean, in most cases, you have the old all the old guard getting, past, getting, laid off, or if they're in the company, they have no control, and you just have this board of directors that were hired to delegate, but and you have the consultants that believe they know better than people that have worked there for 20 years simply because they have an ideology and a degree, and this is happening across the board, right? This is happening with companies that should be, you know they should be competing, but they're not. Like, you see this across the fucking board.
Rayman exploded onto the scene, a game using interactive and creative puzzle and platforming mechanics that we hadn't even seen before.
Yeah, I
It sold
remember
over
Rayman.
400,000 units by the end of the year, becoming the most popular game in Europe and cementing itself in gaming history. Following their success came rapid expansion. By the year 2000, Ubisoft saw exponential growth on their publishing side with major victories on the Dreamcast, with titles like Grandia 2, my favorite JRPG of all time, Tokyo Extreme Racer, F1 Racing Championship, and Taxi 2. However, it was on
The Dreamcast was fucking expensive. Like, we had the Sega. We played Rayman on the PlayStation, but yeah, the Dreamcast was expensive. That's why we didn't get it. And I mean, the Dreamcast was ahead of its time, shall we say, because it didn't really get as much traction.
the PlayStation 2 that Ubisoft would find its identity. While they were still publishing great games like FromSoft's Armored Core 2 and Eternal Ring and Snowblind Studios' Champions of Norath, it was during this time that Ubisoft acquired the license to use Tom Clancy's stories and
Yep.
name in a series of games, with Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon and later Splinter Cell taking the stage. After this, Ubisoft
Which Splinter Cell was on the Xbox where you had the car with guns on it? That one was pretty fucking hype. And yeah, I played Tom Clancy's End War, I think, or Tom Clancy's something. I remember Ghost Recon.
went on a blitz with original titles, quickly rolling out sequel after sequel. Splinter Cell kicked it off in 2003 with Pandora Tomorrow in 2004, Chaos Theory in 2005, Double Agent in 2006. Ghost Recon launched in 2002. It had a sequel in 2004, a
Yeah,
next
that
version
Ghost
of it with
Recon.
Advanced Warfighter in 2006, Advanced Warfighter 2 in 2007.
Yeah, seeing Ghost Recon was revolutionary. Like, the ability to, position your NPC dudes, like, actually contributed to the tactical aspect of the shooter. So it wasn't just another, well, it was a third person shooter, but it wasn't just another shooter. It had a level of tactics, and most games would build upon that system, right?
Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time came out in 2003.
Sands of
Yep,
Time,
just like
yep.
the others, it saw rapid follow-ups with Warrior Within in 2004 and Two Thrones in 2005. Around the mid-2000s, Ubisoft must have realized that this rapid pace was not sustainable, and it started to affect the quality of their games. Later releases took longer. The next Prince of Persia game didn't appear until 2008, and it took 4 years to develop the next Far Cry game from the original that came out in 2004. Despite this intense schedule, Ubisoft was holding its own against rivals in Activision with its military shooters and competing against Konami's Metal Gear Solid through Splinter Cell. Regardless of their success in publishing, developing licensed IPs, and
Yeah,
military,
this is the first Assassin's Creed. And again, with Assassin's Creed, the point was fighting was the last resort, right? You didn't want to fight because one or two hits and you're dead, right? And you're fighting, like, effectively in an army. And it had such interesting mechanics because, well, I remember one of them, you could literally pay prostitutes to just walk around you, and they'll flirt with the guards, and they'll, do all that. Or you can, like, and one of the mechanics was hiding in a crowd. So you're in, you're effectively in the open, but you're amongst a crowd of people. And this was also revolutionary because it masked your a presence with the AI and with the NPCs. So you're effectively hidden, right? Until you did your kill, and you could do your kill stealthily, or you could do your kill and then run the fuck out. But when you run out, again, you're running from guards who are on tow, and you have to use every obstacle to your advantage to get out. Like, again, fighting was the last resort. You didn't want to fight. That wasn't really the point. But I believe in most Assassin's Creed that's sort of just thrown out. But with Valhalla, that makes sense, and that what made Valhalla popular, right? Because it effectively was an Assassin's Creed.
Shooters, it was the release of Assassin's Creed in 2007 that sent Ubisoft into orbit.
Yep.
And it bridged a gap with a title that appealed to audiences worldwide. There was nothing like it in the market at the time. This game was an enigma. It was far and away the best looking game on consoles. Its fluid movement, parkour, and combat felt alien. Its setting of reliving our ancestors' memories while we chase a relic to try to stop the Shadow Government Templars was fresh and original. Assassin's Creed defined modern gaming at the time, and it made Ubisoft a household name. Ubisoft was everywhere at this time. You'd be hard-pressed not to turn on your console or turn on your PC and see that logo pop up. And it wasn't just the games that they were making, it was the games that they were publishing. They had such a good eye for talent, such a good eye for great games. And as a result, they made a ton of money. I mean, they published Morrowind. I didn't even know that. I was going through some of the history of all the different...
Holy shit, I didn't even know that. Now, I played Morrowind like a hell of a lot later. Oblivion was my first one, but I didn't even know that. Right?
Games that they had published over the years, and I was sitting back going like, man, these guys are raking in cash at the time. But it wasn't just those games as well. It was also the successes that they were seeing with the games that they were making. They had such a fresh and high quality outlook on all the games that they were creating. They were really leaning into presentation more than anything else. They wanted to make sure that their games just looked the best, hands down, bar none, no competition. And they pulled it off. Advanced Warfighter 1 and 2 were some of my favorite shooters of all time. Even kind of more than some of the Call of Duty games at the time. They're likely the games that ended up inspiring Call of Duty Modern Warfare 1 and 2. You look at Splinter Cell and Metal Gear Solid, they leaned really hard into the stealth aspects, the spy aspects of those kind of games, and as a result, they found their own following and gave a really unique experience that you weren't getting from the Metal Gear Solid games. While the narrative...
Yeah, and seeing that was the thing, right? Even though they are both kind of the same, like you had one niche with Metal Gear and Kojima, and another one with, Splinter Cell, and even though, again, yeah, they were kind of similar, but you got two completely different experiences. Like, they weren't copying each other to an extent. They were, again, two completely different. And again, most games were like this. Like, you could have 3 first-person shooters. Like, you had Battlefield, Call of Duty, right, and Killzone. And they were first-person shooters, but there were 3 completely different ones that had 3 completely different, interactions and worlds, right? And that's what made each one have its own separate ecosystem of an experience. Now games don't do that. Everything wants to be Fortnite. Everything wants to be, Marvel schlop humor. Like, everyone wants to play follow the leader. And above that, you have ideology thrown as a shield to protect bad fucking products.
Wasn't nearly as strong. It was still pretty good, but the gameplay was completely different. Then you bring out Assassin's Creed, and that just took their quality to a completely different level. At this point, with Ubisoft, if you're buying one of their games, 9 times out of 10, you were going to have your socks knocked off. They were incredible experiences. Yeah. And Ubisoft knew that.
And innovative.
They capitalized on it, and they profited. Following the release of Assassin's Creed in 2007, Ubisoft entered into a golden era that solidified their place as one of the leaders in the AAA industry. The success of Assassin's Creed was not just a one-off hit, it became a flagship franchise that grew in scope and ambition with each installment.
Yeah, see, and I think like you had this interesting mechanic where you had someone you had to assassinate, and once you did, you got the fuck out, and you're effectively followed by the guards. Like that was an interesting mechanic, right?
Assassin's Creed 2 in 2009 expanded upon the original's foundations with deeper gameplay mechanics, a more engaging narrative, and a charismatic protagonist in Ezio Auditore. Still the best protagonist in all of Assassin's Creed. The game was a commercial and critical success, selling over 9 million copies and becoming one of the most celebrated entries in the entire series. The success continued with the...
Yeah, and this was 9 million back then, which was a lot. Like, nowadays, 20 million it's good, right? Like, 20 million's good, but, you know, back then, and even if you take inflation into consideration, like, they made a lot of fucking money off this game.
Assassin's Creed Brotherhood in 2010 and Assassin's Creed Revelations in 2011. In combination with this, Ubisoft was experiencing major successes with their Far Cry series. Far Cry 3 in 2012 was a groundbreaking title that redefined open-world gaming. It introduced vast, explorable islands filled with diverse environments and a gripping story and one of the most memorable protagonists in all of gaming history. And I think that character shows just how far Ubisoft today has fallen from where they came from. No shot Ubisoft ever makes a villain like this again.
I'm sorry, what did you say? What did you say? Do you want me to slice you open like I did your friend? Shut the fuck up! Okay? I'm the one with the fucking dick. Look at me. Look me in the fucking eye. Hey! You fuck! Look me in the eye. You're my bitch. I rule this fucking kingdom.
Yeah, and you see games like a Star Wars Outlaws, you know, probably the new Assassin's Creed. Like, they're never going to push these boundaries again. Like, there are people that they hire whose entire job is to fuck with the process. This is why games take longer. This is why their games cost a lot more money than what they should cost. They hire consultants. They hire people whose entire job is to be like, no, you're not allowed to do that. And they do this to suck up ESG money. They do this to ensure they can sell their games and bypass legislature. They do this so they have the connections so they can be the games that are given awards. And the problem with this is the consumer loses. Like, this was a objectively better game than any entry of Far Cry that came after. And the DLC was also pretty damn good. But they can't do that because they hire people that keep them from doing that. And there are legislation, and they want the ESG money, and because they want that money and that low score, they cannot do this.
Far Cry 3 sold over 10 million copies and was lauded as one of the best games of the generation, setting a new benchmark for open-world shooters. The series continued to thrive with Far Cry 4 in 2014 and Far Cry 5 in 2018, each expanding on the franchise's formula with new mechanics and narratives. By 2018, Far Cry 5 became the fastest-selling title in Ubisoft's history, moving over 5 million copies within the first week, solidifying the franchise's place in history. In parallel with the success that they had going on with the Far Cry series, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege initially launched to a modest reception, but through consistent updates and community engagement, it has now grown into one of the most popular and enduring multiplayer shooters, even still today. By 2018, Rainbow Six Siege had amassed over 30 million players. Tom Clancy's The Division in 2016 was another major hit, offering a compelling blend of third-person shooting and RPG mechanics set in a post-apocalyptic New York.
I didn't really much care for The Division. I mean, I liked the premise, but I just didn't much care for it. I mean, I played the game. I played a bit of like I think it's like the Dark Sector, but 2 was, I didn't even bother.
It was Ubisoft's fastest-selling new IP at launch, earning $330 million in sales within the first week.
But yeah, I mean, yeah,
it showcased Ubisoft's ability
popular
to successfully launch a new IP while still being able to maintain their existing franchises. If we take a snapshot of the successes from 2000 to 2018, we see a Ubisoft that was consistently delivering on high-quality experiences while innovating within existing franchises, creating new franchises, doing all kinds of things. But at the exact same time, we also see a foreboding trend. The minute that they see a game become successful, they hammer that nail again and again and again. Sometimes within such quick succession that we're seeing sequels with games within year to year to year to year, back to back to back to back, and then they stop. And that's going to take a toll, not only on the developers, but also on the audiences. But by 2018, Ubisoft was worth $24 a share. It was the highest price. It's still the highest price that they've ever been worth. And in that, that's the perfect reflection, whether you care about share prices or not, it's the perfect reflection of what the company was worth at the time. 10 times the value that they were before they released Assassin's Creed. They were swimming in cash. They were so successful. They were massive. But
yeah, and that success came from them meeting consumer expectation, from them taking risks, right? And that's really the thing I need to hammer home is they took risks. Game companies took risks. They risk the bad and end up getting the good, right? And again, many companies just don't do that, right? Like Assassin's Creed effectively killed Prince of Persia, but then they threw out, again, that goofy newer Prince of Persia that nobody really wanted because it had none of the charm that the older one had, and they are failing to meet that expectation.
When you reach those peaks, there tends to be a trend that follows. And they've been following that trend straight into the ground. As Ubisoft entered into 2018, the cracks in its previously successful formula began to show. While the company had relied on its major franchises to drive growth and maintain its position within the industry, the strategy began to falter. The initial decline of this period can largely be attributed to Ubisoft's over-reliance on its established franchises, a pattern that we've seen with many major publishers. The once groundbreaking mechanics and narratives that defined Ubisoft's titles were beginning to feel repetitive.
Yeah, see, they're looking for that quadruple A game, right? The game that costs even more money to make and they dump even more money into, and they're following, again, look, like the gear score trend, the damn DPS trend where each gun has a certain level amount of damage and you have to level up in order to get better guns, in order to, you know, kill better enemies. They're effectively becoming Borderlands. And I think this was around the when did Borderlands 2 came out? Because I think that's around the time many people just started following that trend, right? And again, it was good with Borderlands, but again, people can tell if a company is trend chasing. Like they can tell if the product universally suffers because of trend chasing, and what I'm seeing on the screen is literally the result of that,
leading to players feeling bored and fatigued with Ubisoft's design. I'll be honest, by the third Assassin's Creed, I had already tapped out because I felt like I saw the writing on the wall. Every time I watched any of their reveals or trailers, I said, yeah, I've done all this before.
Personally, I think Black Flag was just peak. Like, was it the best? Probably not, but at the time, they were like, oh, hey, you like this mechanic in 3 with the ship mechanic and all that? Well, fuck, let's just make that its own goddamn game. And again, in 3, people were wanting an Assassin's Creed in Japan because there's so much history, there's so much lore, there's so much cool architecture, and there's so much you could do with it. And I need you to understand, they put an Assassin's Creed in almost every single other continent, every single other geographical location, and they only put Assassin's Creed in Japan at a time where they can use ideology to push the pandering to lower the ESG score to get that ESG money, right? That is the only reason why they did it, which is why you have Yasuke. Now, if they would have did Yasuke justice, well, I doubt anyone would still play the game, but I mean, it would have been better. But no, they actively chose to release ideology right? And this is why when people see the game, they say DEI, they say woke, because this is what they are trying to push, or at least it's what they're using as a shield to defend their bad fucking products. They're saying, "Oh no, we have this ideology, so you're the bad guy." It's like, shut the fuck up. If you want my fucking money, you release a product that's worth my fucking money, because I work hard for my goddamn money, right? And you don't deserve my money just because, again, you claim to speak on my fucking behalf. Like I don't need a multi-billion-dollar company to speak on my fucking behalf. And if you do, for the love of God, just find Jesus. Like, find an ideology.
This over-reliance on existing franchises resulted in a slew of releases that, while still commercially viable, lacked the innovative spark that once defined the company. Assassin's Creed Odyssey in 2018 was a prime example of this issue. Despite it being a commercial success and receiving positive reviews, it didn't quite reach the heights of previous entries in the series.
And the problem with Odyssey was you could pay actual money to get experience points. Like, you could grind for like hours and eventually get the experience you need to continue the game, or you could pay real world money, microtransactions in a single player goddamn game. And this actively warped the game itself to goad players into spending money. Because again, if you didn't do that, well, you had to dump 6, 7, 8 hours in pointless fucking grinding to get there. Like, that was my issue. That's why I didn't care to fucking play it. It's like, and it's Assassin's Creed. Like, you can have difficulty in the game, but you have to give people a means to get around it, right? You have to allow the player to, use their brain sack to get around. No, the game's like, no, you either pay or you go on this pointless fucking grind. And there are many, like, floodgates that in this game that where you had to do that. And I'm like, well why would I play that?
While it expanded upon RPG elements that were introduced in Assassin's Creed Origins, players and critics alike felt that the formula was becoming stale, with the vast majority of the open world and numerous side activities feeling more like a checklist rather than an engaging experience. This propagated a shared perception between players and critics of more of the same. Ubisoft games were becoming predictable, drawn out, and boring. Far Cry New Dawn in 2019 suffered from the exact same issues. As a direct sequel to Far Cry 5, it attempted to build on the narrative and setting, but was seen as more of an expansion than a full-fledged new installment. The game was a commercial success to a degree, but it didn't match the sales or the impact of Far Cry 3 or Far Cry 4. The narrative was considered weaker, the post-apocalyptic setting, while a new direction for the series, didn't really resonate strongly with the player base. This underwhelming reception was indicative of a larger issue.
Yeah, it was just another Ubisoft open world, vapid, bland game, right? And again, it's them taking what was popular, what gave them the most money, and just doing it over and over and over and trying to milk more and more from the customer.
Lack of fresh ideas and a growing formulaic approach to game design. Another notable release during this period was The Division 2 in 2019. Now, this game was well received. It had refined mechanics over the first game, the endgame content was really engaging, and it was twice the size, if not larger, than the first game. However, despite its reception, it didn't meet Ubisoft's high sales expectations. The live service model that they had injected into the game arbitrarily, while successful in Rainbow Six Siege, did not effectively translate into The Division 2. This is partly due to market saturation, as other players are more invested in other live service games, but from my perspective as a fan from Division 2, the live service model just didn't work here. It felt generic. In a game where you're finding loot, and that's the gameplay loop, the last thing that you want to do is buy things to wear. You want to stand out for your achievements in the game, not how much you spent on loot boxes.
Yeah, and the live service thing just sort of became, a stain eventually. But yeah, it's like they see other live service games being popular, and they're like, oh, well, let's pump that into this game. Well, you didn't really need to do that. And the one thing I liked about The Division, now The Division had many fucking flaws, but I did like its damage calculation and the DPS calculation on its weapons. Like, that was all revolutionary. Like, it's like, okay, I could choose the gun that did more damage, but maybe a gun that does less damage but has more fire rate, a more higher mag, less recoil will probably be better than just a gun that does a better initial damage. And the DPS, it reflected that. And that was probably one of the best systems. And I think even games like Warframe build upon that system, because it's like, okay, maybe utility on a weapon is better than just overall big number bang bang.
This pattern of diminishing returns, poorly implemented monetization, and loss of connection with the players is a common issue for companies that heavily rely on their existing franchises. While sequels and spin-offs can capitalize on established fan bases, they also run the risk of alienating players by offering experiences that feel all too familiar, or injecting things into those experiences that make them, well, just something the players don't want to engage with whatsoever.
Also, there were a lot of fucking bullet sponges. Like, every boss was just sucked up bullets. And you've seen, like, they had the damage counters on them. You've seen, they had to shoot that guy like 20 fucking times to kill him. Again, it started just trying to become Borderlands, but that's not what people really wanted. And again, this mechanic existed specifically to make you pay for the game and, do the grind just so you can get better things, just so you can grind a higher bracket, just so you can get a higher level loot within that bracket, just so you can, again, you're just further pushing the boulder, like you're Sisyphus, forever pushing that boulder, and eventually you're just like, well, I don't want to push this no more, I'm out, peace.
Ubisoft's reliance on its core franchises like Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and the Tom Clancy games led to a perception that the company was simply reusing the same templates with minor tweaks and adding monetization. This lack of innovation and growing similarities between their titles resulted in players being less excited about their new games, and they began to see Ubisoft games as formulaic in design, with sprawling open worlds filled with repetitive tasks rather than unique and engaging experiences. And I think that's the most troubling thing when it comes to Ubisoft. It's their aversion to criticism. Get that away from me. And they're not alone in that, okay?
Yeah.
There's plenty of other studios and journalists that are out there that feel the same way. Don't listen to the gamers, those angry gamers. They don't know anything. And look.
Yeah, they think they're this ideological class of people that are beyond reproach. And that's idiotic. Like, it's this way in just almost every other aspect of humans, like in your job, at school, at work, at home. Like, if you do a bad fucking job at your job, you're going to get criticized. People are going to get, like, if you're bad, people are going to call you bad. Like, it's fine to be bad if you want to be better, but they don't want to be better. They want to go after the consumer and demand your fucking money. And again, they mobilize their bots and their shills on Twitter to go after you. And they claim to have an ideology so they can mobilize also that crowd after you, the consumer, you, the person who puts food on their fucking table, right? This is the problem. And yeah, they're not the only ones, but Ubisoft is adversely feeling the effects of this.
Look, I get it. While 9 times out of 10 players don't know how to voice their criticisms effectively, oftentimes they're just being mean when they say things, they're still telling you that something's wrong with your games and you need to fix it. But year after year, Ubisoft has completely failed to listen to any criticism, whether that's coming from professional critics or the players. People have been saying for years how formulaic their design is, how scary predictable their games are. I know that if I log into an open world Ubisoft game, it's just going to be a checklist simulator.
Yeah.
Everybody still remembers when their developers took to Twitter to criticize Elden Ring of all games for its open world design, its quest design, and its UI.
Yeah, a game that on every single fucking metric was objectively better than any Ubisoft game that came out that year and that came out every other year after that. They throw shade at a company, at a game from a company that just does everything better. Every single fucking thing better with their game. Right? That's the problem.
How the fuck do you do that? That's the best game that we've had. One of the best games that we've had in the last decade.
Yeah, and then this is why people think, again, one, CEOs and journalists and anyone that's opens their mouth at the company, like no one takes that into consideration. No one cares. People like just shut the fuck up and make a better game. Why are you shitting on a game that people objectively think is better than anything you could even possibly come out and that has been popular? Why are you shitting on them? Like, why aren't you shitting on Activision or other AAA multi-billion-dollar American gaming companies? Why does everyone got shit on the East? Like, they're actually nowadays they're actually giving the consumers good fucking games, right? Why you got? Oh well, you can't shit on them because you're all part of the same clique, part of the same industry, and you utilize the power of all these type of industries and all these companies to go after your consumer and demand they pay you money. It's like no one with a fully functioning frontal cortex will accept that. And I don't care what fucking ideology you have. Like, I don't care if you have the ideology that agrees with me. The minute you start moralizing, I tell you to shut the fuck up.
Why wouldn't you look at a game like that, look at the success that it sees, and say, we need to internalize some of the things that this game did well, why players liked it, and then reflect that in our games going forward? That's how you make better products. You learn from your competition, learn from the games that do well, instead of looking at it, wanting to criticize it, and trying to make excuses why you think that your games are better. Don't play Assassin's Creed instead. Fuck that. Look, Ubisoft had a bit of a resurgence in 2018 to 2019, and it looked like they were getting back on the horse. It looked like they were listening to player feedback. They were implementing in their games. It was making better games as a result. They were making a lot of money, but that only lasted for so long. After a period of declining interest and fatigue, Ubisoft managed to stage a bit of a...
As you can see, they had the dip. Then people started buying the dip, but then it went back down. They bought the dip again, and then it's going even further down. And people are saying they're doing this intentionally so the Guillermo brothers can just buy the company back, right? And effectively have full hegemonic control of the company. This is what I've heard. But honestly, I don't care if they buy it back or not. Again, people just don't have faith in Ubisoft anymore. So, I mean, it's just it's gonna wallow in obscurity and no one's gonna buy their product.
A resurgence in 2019 and 2020 by revisiting some of their core franchises with a renewed focus and experimenting with some fresh ideas.
Yeah, about buying the dip, they actually made okay games at the time, but as you can see, they just dipped again and again and again.
Now, who thought something like that could actually have a positive impact on your sales? One of the most significant releases during this time was Assassin's Creed Valhalla in 2020. This game was a commercial hit, selling more copies during its launch week than any other previous Assassin's Creed title. It received praise for its engaging narrative, improved combat mechanics, and rich historical setting. Valhalla revitalized interest in the series. It showed that Ubisoft could make changes. However, that isn't to say that players' complaints didn't remain the same. Many reviewers and players lamented over the length of the game, and while Valhalla introduced some innovative elements, territory arcs as well as the narrative just dragged on for far too long. The game's average completion time was over 60 hours, and 100% completion was nearing over 200 hours. No matter what you do, elements that were praised at the beginning of the game are going to start to feel repetitive, and it's just, yet again, going to feel like a checklist of tasks.
Yeah, but it was popular because it was new. Like, it effectively wasn't Assassin's Creed, but it was an interesting and new combat style. It was a new setting that people were interested in. I mean, and yeah, being too long, of course, it's a fucking Ubisoft game, but I'll probably personally, I didn't play this game. I didn't care to play it. I tuned out of Assassin's Creed after 4. But and they had another chance to do this in was it Assassin's Creed Rogue, where you played effectively spoilers. You play effectively a Templar, and again right then and there they had a chance to make a different and innovative fighting style, different and innovative story, but you just fought like an assassin anyway because they copy pasted.
In the same year, they released Watchdog Legions, which attempted to innovate with its play-as-anyone mechanic, allowing the player to recruit and control virtually any character in the entire game world. While the game received mixed reception due to some technical issues and a less than compelling story than we've seen from its predecessors, it sold relatively well, and it showed that the company was willing to take some risks and explore some new concepts with existing franchises. Immortals Phoenix Rising in 2020 was another one of those key releases that showed Ubisoft had a willingness to experiment and even come out with some new IPs. The game offered a vibrant and humorous take on Greek mythology combined with open world exploration and puzzle solving and action combat. There were a lot of folks that liked this game, and in some cases people liked it even more than Breath of the Wild at the time. Though it didn't reach the commercial heights of Assassin's Creed or Far Cry, it showed that Ubisoft could still deliver a fresh and enjoyable experience outside of their established franchises.
Yeah, I mean, if they have that intent, they absolutely, like any game, can do that. Like, it's obvious that nowadays people want small, concise, controlled projects and games that, aren't trying to be anything as grandiose, but aren't just following the exact same standard template that most games are doing with the live services and the microtransactions and all that. Like, it's, and again, there's so much proof of this. There's no real need to go over it again, but that's clearly what the market wants. But for some reason they can't do that because, again, you have to stay on popular IPs. You have to follow the trend that makes money, which is the Fortnite trend, right? The live service and all that. And again, it's just, that's not really what the consumer want. Or people are fine with that in Fortnite, but no one really cares for Fortnite being in every single other goddamn game you buy.
However, I think the most important thing to keep in mind during this period of time and this surge of growth at Ubisoft, and the biggest boon to Ubisoft at the time, as well as many other developers as well, is that, well, there was a pandemic and lockdown that was driving an increase in game sales and player engagement. With people spending more time at home, the demand for games surged. Ubisoft benefited from this greatly as their established franchises and live service games offered an extensive amount of content for players to explore. Rainbow Six Siege saw massive growth during this period, with the player base growing to over 70 million players by the end of 2021. Continued support through regular updates, new operators, and seasonal events helped keep that community engaged and invested even today.
Yeah, a lot of people really do just invest, and this is like known. People invest a lot in entertainment during like recessions, right? And I think many entertainment companies, expanded in these situations. They're like, oh, we can hire a lot more people, we can push out a lot more products to meet the demand. But again, after the pandemic, people went back to work. They obviously didn't have that amount of time anymore. But these companies, like, they still need projected growth every year to be sustainable. And that's what the live service model was an attempt to do, is the attempt at having infinite projected growth throughout their IPs and throughout products. But it's just not really the way things were.
Any game studio that had a game that came out or was ready to release right around the time of lockdowns saw massive growth and massive profits. Go figure. But as we've learned, that growth is inorganic and unsustainable, and none of them had been able to maintain it. So with that said, yeah, of course Ubisoft was going to see a little bit of growth there, and they definitely evolved a little bit past some of their game design issues, but the vast majority of those issues still remained. Those same criticisms were still there regardless of the years that had gone by. And one of the other problems that Ubisoft has is the minute that they see something work, they will hammer it until the wheels fall off. They will exhaust you as fast as they possibly can because they just want to try to make as much money as fast as they possibly can, rather than paying attention to what the longevity of that game would look like, how much more money you could make if the game lived longer. But they just love killing games. When you have an entire industry that is criticizing your games, where in a lot of cases you can take some of these reviews for some of their games, layer them on top of each other, and it looks like they're reviewing the exact same game. When you have your players that are complaining about your monetization practices and your prices, you don't then go and just make all those things worse. You don't just keep doing the exact same thing. You don't inject.
Well, again, it was one of those situations where they're like, yeah, we can take the loss of consumer as long as we suck up investor money, suck up ESG, suck up government grants. Like, you know, what they'll lose in one aspect, they'll gain in another. But we're finding out that, again, that is also another unsustainable notion, right? You know, and, you know, again, people still buy these products, right? And again, when that becomes the case, it's like the game, the project isn't really, you know, the product. Like in this case, it's ideology, so they can have government grants, so they can get a low ESG score to suck up that money. And see, that's the problem, right? The problem is they're actively attempting to bypass the consumer.
How do you put XP boost in a single player game?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Honestly, yeah.
Why? What is this?
Because people buy it.
It completely defeats the purpose of playing games like this in the first place. We know that all you're doing is just expanding the content as far as you possibly can to make it unrealistic for casual players to play without spending money. It's transparent. That's the worst part about them. They are transparent greed manifest.
Yeah.
You can see everything they do, and they think that they're being sneaky about it.
And, well, they're not being sneaky because the product itself fundamentally suffers. Like, I gave the example of Odyssey, but we know that games where they add single-player games where microtransactions are added, that the game itself is contorted and skewed to make you buy those microtransactions, to make you pay money above the 60, well, at the time it was 60, now it's 70, to buy the $70 above paying the $70, and then pay another 20 or another 30. Like, we know that the game itself is made specifically to make you do this. Like, this isn't even a question. If it's not, assume it is. Because even if you're wrong, it's like, okay, I'm wrong, whatever. You still don't need microtransactions, fucking idiots. Right? Like, you lose nothing when you're wrong. You lose a lot when you're right. It's like you lose the fundamental aspect of the game, of why you play the game, if you're right, and it is skewed. So, just assume that if there's microtransactions, that the game is made for them.
What are you talking about? Get comfortable with not buying your games. I know what you mean by that. I know the implications of what you're talking about. Because that means that you're going to try to make it where we can't buy games. That'll make us a little bit more comfortable with it in the future, right? Well, don't worry about it. We're all pretty comfortable with not buying your games.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, they're video games. Like, it's not food. It's not clothes. You know, it's not an essential thing. Like, you're selling a game. Like, I can remain disinterested longer than Ubisoft can remain solvent. Right? Unless they somehow release Beyond Good Evil and Evil 2, which I doubt they will, and if they do, it's probably just going to be stuff with ideology, because nowadays you can only make a game that does ideology. It's like the ideology is the product, the game is secondary. You know, wokeness is the product, the game is secondary, right? Unless they do that, like, I don't need to buy another Ubisoft game. And you can attack me all you want, but again, you buy 3 or 4 copies of the game for me. You know, buy a copy for me, right? Will I play it? No, but hey, if you want to make up for the sales loss that you're having and you want to defend Ubisoft, buy a couple of copies. You know, fund them with your money, because I'm sure as hell not funding this idea with mine.
Brings us to the rapid decline of Ubisoft over the past few years, with release after release failing to deliver on expectations while doing nothing to compete with recent shifts in the market. To me, Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint in 2019 encapsulates everything that's wrong with modern Ubisoft. It was buggy, the writing was awful, it was repetitive and generic, over-bloated and over-monetized. They monetized XP gains. They put vehicles and skins that had no business being in the game into the game and destroyed any sense of immersion in a largely single-player experience. Like every other open-world game from Ubisoft, even still today, they haphazardly put in RPG mechanics like varied loot, skill trees, and more. Mechanics that are only there to extend the player's time in the game, putting these elements in there as a means to gatekeep players from progressing the story or taking on certain enemies. I think SkillUp said it best when he was reviewing Breakpoint, saying, "Why the fuck is this in the game? Why is it so poorly implemented? And why is it in every game in their portfolio?" This sort of design philosophy has proliferated through just about every single game that they make, and what makes matters worse for Ubisoft, and I think this is the one thing that the vast majority of people are overlooking here, it's what's killing their sales. It's the increase in competition from other publishers with new successful IPs. Games like Elden Ring and Genshin Impact have captured player interest. Elden Ring's open-world design and exploration set a new benchmark for the genre.
Yeah, I mean, competition is always just the killer of, a company that doesn't care for the consumer. But it's like, name a game that doesn't have crafting, loot boxes, microtransactions, some level of skill, progression, and level up, and there's like gear score. It's like, that was the majority of games back then because they're such either easier to implement and just to copy and paste from previous games, and it's just it feeds upon that dopamine of, oh, I got better gun. Like Borderlands 3 was like this. Like in Borderlands 2, when you got a legendary, right, you're like, holy shit. Or even if you got a Seraphim weapon, it was like even more holy shit. But now it's like they just hand you legendaries. And it's like, what? And then you have one legendary that's the same as another legendary. The difference is this one's a sniper, but another one's just like a pistol, but they have the same effect. Like, they've ruined even that system. Like, they wanted to keep pumping you full of dopamine, but the problem is you just grew immune to the effect after a while. It's like none of them seemed interesting, seemed good, and it obliterated Borderlands. Like, I don't really care to play any other Borderlands. Like, I'd play 2 again in a heartwell. I have an aversion to playing games I already 100%ed or close to it. Like, I was max fucking level as Craig the Psycho on 2, and I have that flash drive for my 360, so I'll just plug that in. But, I mean, I wouldn't be against playing 3, Borderlands 2 again. Like, and this is why people are moving back to older games, because they have the soul, right? The games nowadays just don't have any soul in them.
While Genshin Impact offers a free-to-play model in an open-world game with high production values, and it's shaking up players' expectations. Games like these force players to compare similarities, and when you contrast Ubisoft games with the experiences that players have had access to over the past few years, it's no wonder why people aren't playing their games. And this goes back to what we were discussing previously. Ubisoft's core issue is their inability to change and recognize trends. Their loss in quality and generic monetization. Look at their first quadruple A game ever made, Skull and Bones, a $70 live service title in development for 11 years, costing over $200 million, only to release a more boring version of Assassin's Creed Black Flag with less than 700 concurrent players on Steam. They set out to make a more consumable version of Assassin's Creed with Mirage, charging $50 for a less than 15-hour game that did nothing to evolve the franchise.
Yeah, and again, you're looking like this looks like a PS3 game, right? It's like, hold on, like this is supposed to be a woman, by the way, even though she's over like 50, And again, this is a game for young adolescent men, but you have the old lady who's not hot whatsoever. PS3 graphics, you know, and I don't even know what Mirage went out to try to achieve. Like, and usually this is what people ask, like, what is the point of this game? Well, there was no point other than to just ride a trend, but have none of the appeal.
$50 for a less than 15-hour game that did nothing to evolve the franchise. They finally returned to Prince of Persia with The Lost Crown. They made an awesome game. It was really innovative. I actually enjoyed it, but they charged $40 for a Metroidvania game in a market where those games cost a fourth of the price.
I did not like this game whatsoever. Like, I fucking refunded this. This is not what I wanted. Like, yeah, I didn't want a Metroid. I didn't want like a side scroller 2D. I mean, it looks cool and flashy, but again, a Prince of Persia game where you don't play the prince. It doesn't take place in Persia. What?
Star Wars Outlaws, a game for all intents and purposes, should have been an easy home run, but ultimately showcases how dire the situation is at Ubisoft. Not only does the game suffer from quality issues, unattractive character designs, bugs, repetitiveness, and inconsistencies, but in an attempt to remove some of their open world bloat, you come to realize just how those elements, once they're removed, the game is really just held together by duct tape.
Yeah, the character was ugly, unappealing, boring. Like, it was a game where it's called Outlaws, but you could only rob from the police. You couldn't rob from the poor. You can pet the animals, but you can't shoot and kill them. You can't be a dick. Like, again, who is this game for? It's not for gamers, right? And I think after, like, there was a day one patch, I think the patch came out a couple days after that, effectively erased your whatever progress you made, so you had to start over. And oh yeah, and they have the 70 version, $129 version, $170 version. Like, I get it. People be like, oh, well, if you don't like it, don't buy it. No, we should bring back this pure, unadulterated shame. Like, shame on you for demanding 120 something fucking dollars. Like, this is something that should be willed into existence. How dare you demand 170 fucking dollars from a person to play this schlop? I don't care if you don't like it, don't buy it. How fucking dare you demand? Like, if I see the Ultimate Edition is 100 something dollars, I will shame you for it. Even if I'll never play it, how fucking dare you demand that goddamn money for whatever the fuck this is? This is what we need to bring on the table.
Eurogamer in their review said something really interesting, saying that the problem with Star Wars Outlaws, however, isn't that it adheres too closely to the development approach akin to hoarding, but that it does the opposite, stripping away years of accumulated video game clutter. Admirably, Outlaws does this quite aggressively, Kessel Sabak aside. But in doing so, it reveals an integral issue. Ubisoft open world games are not only fun because of their formula, they are their formula. To strip away isn't to peel off some old wallpaper to reveal the original brickwork, it's lifting up the carpet to find a whacking great hole in the ground.
Yeah.
Meaning that their games are hollow, and I think that that's a fitting description. From my perspective as a...
Yeah, the live service is effectively duct tape over a very shallow but wide as a fucking ocean game, but it goes up to like the water goes up to your ankle. Like, people knew this isn't new.
The player, Ubisoft has become synonymous with generic games that are overpriced, overmonetized, and overly repetitive. Outside of the Division 1 and 2, I've had no interest whatsoever in playing any of their games because I've already played them years ago, and playing the next game isn't going to be any different. It's the same games pushed out the door for profit that lack any creativity or originality. Now we look at their next release, Assassin's Creed Shadows,
Here
a
we
game
go.
criticized well before its release because, other than legacy media, everyone else can see the elephant in the room. An Assassin's Creed game finally set in Japan, a setting that is so great for a game with this kind of theme, only to include a tokenized representation of a character with vague at best historical relevance backed by a hip-hop soundtrack and combat. Why is it that representation to these people means hip-hop soundtracks or a character wearing Jordans whose power is that they run fast? I'll be honest, I think...
Well, again, because these are consultants who don't travel the world. They don't interact with other cultures. They only interact with a small, fringe, radical, ideological minority of people that graduate with them. They got indoctrinated by their professors, and they think they know better than you because they have a degree. They believe you are unintelligent. You, Legendary Drops. They think you are unintelligent because their ideology demands that they do, right? And these people are hired into Ubisoft, and they make these goofy ass decisions that they know people don't care. And again, I did a video on the Ubisoft talking about the dual trailers, right? Nothing but fucking white people who believe they know Japanese culture better, but they are shoving incompatible ideology in the game, which is absolutely like antithetical to any of the historical Japanese products. And even a Japanese politician is like, what the fuck is this bullshit? Get this shit out my fucking face. And people are just shitting on it, right? And people have every right to shit on it. Because again, they use these things, they use DEI, they use representation, they use these things as shields. They put them in the game and be like, yes, this is the product. The game is secondary. So when you have a bad fucking game, right, a terrible goddamn game, yeah, people are going to shit on it, and people are going to shit on any DEI. They're going to shit like, this is how people act, right? This is how people react to bad fucking products that use ideology as a fucking shield to put in place in front of the person, right? So, and again, I don't know why we have to play make believe and pretend that this is a bad thing.
That a lot of the dialogue surrounding Assassin's Creed Shadows are issues that players would largely ignore if they knew that Assassin's Creed, that this game, was going to be incredible. But over the years, players have come to expect less and less from Ubisoft games. Why are investors so concerned? Why are they jumping ship before one of the largest releases of Ubisoft in recent memory? Well, why don't you tell me why anyone would want to play Assassin's Creed Shadows when they have far better Eastern-themed alternatives that without a doubt have better combat, better environments, higher quality, and better storytelling, without the need to be able to make a statement or press their morals against an audience? Why would I play Assassin's Creed Shadows when I could play Black Myth Wukong, Ghost of Tsushima, or Rise of Ronin? Why would I play something that I have already played when I could play something entirely fresh?
So, because not only do they disregard the consumer, they disregard gamers. They disregard, and again, these are from companies that claim to be inclusive, but they disregard any products from other countries, like from Japan or from China or South Korea, that actually are good products, right? And again, they claim to be inclusive. Like, they'll be like, oh yeah, our product that again relates to a small fringe minority of Americans, not even the majority, is the most inclusive fucking product, right? But then you have Black Myth Wukong that sold 20 million copies. You have Genshin Impact that has hundreds of thousands of concurrent players, right? You have, hell, I think even fucking the First Ascendant, which you made a video on and shat on, more people playing that than will probably ever play Assassin's Creed Shadows, right? And not only do they disregard the consumer, they disregard the competition. They jump in their echo chambers, and they just cover their eyes, cover their ears to everything else. And again, when this happens, the consumer covers their eyes and ears to you. They're like, okay, well, I'll just play Ghost of Tsushima or Black Myth Wukong. And then when you say this, right, they attack you. Like their shills, their bots, their community managers will attack you for daring to make a purchasing decision that's in your interests. And this is the problem. They hate that you're making a purchasing decision in your own interests. They want you to make a purchasing decision in their interest.
Ubisoft's issues are the same issues that plague the vast majority of the largest publishers and developers in the industry, and it's that over the years, while they've continued to grow and chase profits, they've lost a unified vision of what their game should represent. In the pursuit for profits and expanding their market share and maximizing revenue through aggressive monetization strategies, they've strayed from the creative foundations that once made them an industry leader. This fragmented approach has led to a loss of identity, resulting in games that feel more like products that are churned out to meet quarterly targets rather than passionate, well-crafted experiences. Look at the speed of Ubisoft's game releases. They struck the iron while the iron was hot, barely spacing any of their game releases, rarely making new IPs, or changing their perspective on how to deliver existing franchises. This lack of cohesive vision and the inability to change has not only diluted the quality and the uniqueness of their franchises, but also eroded the trust and enthusiasm of the player bases. They're exhausted. Without a clear sense of purpose and a commitment to innovation and quality, Ubisoft, like many others in the industry, has found itself trapped in a cycle of diminishing returns and waning relevance.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with making money, right? But again, if the consumer loses in this attempt to make money, then that's bad, right? If the product the consumer consumes is worse in this attempt, then it's bad. Like, it is in the consumer's interest that they innovate and, again, meet their consumer expectation.
And I'll be honest, it's not going to stop. From my perspective, this is likely the end of Ubisoft. The ship is too big to be able to turn on a dime, and the kind of overhaul that they need is likely a decade away. We can't save Ubisoft, and honestly, we don't want to. Let this be a stark warning to the rest of the industry, a cautionary tale. When you churn out games that nobody wants to buy, when you nickel and dime your players at every turn, when you strip your games of their soul, you don't just lose a sale. You lose your place in the industry. Yeah. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and Ubisoft has played them all. I tried to do my best to be able to showcase the highs and lows of the company and all the games that they made, but I found the more that I researched, the more that I wrote, I just kept talking about the same games over and over again for damn near 20 years. Assassin's Creed, Rainbow Six, Far Cry. Assassin's Creed, Rainbow Six, Far Cry. Assassin's Creed, Rainbow Six, Far Cry.
Over and over and over.
You want to make sure that you're doing what you can to support the titles that players love the most, the reason why they know your name to begin with. At the same time, when you're absurdly aggressive like Ubisoft, where you just keep pumping out the same titles over and over again, and at the exact same time, you just continue to crank up the monetization and the pricing and how many things are locked behind different versions of your game for $100, $130. Good Lord, what do you expect? What do you think is going to happen when you keep making the same thing over and over again, regardless of how many times people criticize your design, and you just keep increasing the prices? And there's better and more interesting and more unique experiences that are out there that we've been seeing over the last few years. So many of these independent, AA, single A, and indie studios just popping off, selling more copies of games than you do now.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see a problem with that? I was sitting back and I was watching people play Star Wars Outlaws. And I sat there thinking to myself, this is literally just Star Wars Assassin's Creed minus a few mechanics.
Yeah, I watched Asmongold play Star Wars Outlaws. Man had a fucking existential crisis. The game was so bad, right? He's like, every mechanic of the game is just not for me. It's made for God knows who, but it ain't for me. Like, man was struggling. And I was like, yeah, and again, they do this on, like, they are glad this is happening. They are glad that the game's not for you. Again, it's, if you don't like it, don't buy it. It's like, okay, well, the problem is people are taking your advice. A lot of people. Again, they want to claim to be the majority, but again, the numbers just simply don't add up. The sales just simply don't add up. Like, they are not the majority, right? They are this small, fringe, ideological minority of people who just believe they should exist in the industry, right? They believe they should just, you know, covet your money. But the problem is people aren't doing that. People are voting with their wallets, and maybe they're not as outspoken to it as I am. But again, we see the numbers. People are taking the advice, and which is why Ubisoft is where it is now.
It looks so boring. Some of the aspects were cool. I think part of the narrative was somewhat interesting. I liked a few of the environments, but outside of that, the actual mechanical gameplay just looks so boring.
Vapid.
God, it looks so bad. It just goes to show just how creatively robbed the studios are. The only thing that I ask for is that if this company goes down, please somebody make sure they take care of Massive. I like Massive. I like The Division. They've done a really good job. Please make a Division 3 or
Yeah, I mean,
something else if you can't use that title, because I want to see more of those games in the future.
yeah, I mean they have IPs, and again, this is how most businesses done in gaming. It's like they buy up popular IPs and they really just squat on them, just so nobody else can do anything with them. Like if Ubisoft go down, you're gonna lose Rayman, right? You're gonna probably lose Assassin's Creed in the Division. Like these things will be lost to time, or at least until their copyrights are up, which are probably be, and I don't know, maybe next 10 fucking years. I know copyright is weird. I know Superman will eventually hit public domain, so you'll have a lot of shit like with that in DC. But yeah, it takes years for that to happen.
I hate that we're in this weird place in time right now where genuine criticism, voiced well or not, doesn't really matter, is just pushed to the side because both legacy media and publishers and developers just don't want to hear it. Don't listen to the angry gamers. These games aren't made for you. Who are they made for? I'm sure Ubisoft's investors would like to know.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily like to see companies fail. Ubisoft has made a lot of games that I've loved over the years, but at the exact same time, this is, from my perspective, a victory for consumers.
Yeah.
Because this shows the rest of the industry, if you do what Ubisoft has done, you will fail. There's a couple of companies that are out there that have been trying to follow that same line, and while it's continued to work for now, well, as you can see, it doesn't work forever. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, make sure you like and subscribe, share the video with your friends, follow me on Twitch if you guys would like to see me talk about gaming news and play video games live. Outside of that, I'm gonna go and play some video games. What am I playing today? Deadlock, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, again, they are learning to fear the consumer because, again, this is this new ideology where the consumer just simply doesn't have the voice or doesn't have a say in the products that, again, Ubisoft demands you buy, and they shove ideology on it to utilize the ideological crowd to attack you for not buying. They use it as a shield. Like, they demand your fucking money. They covet your fucking money. And again, I work hard for my fucking money, right? And no, it's like I will put my money towards the things, towards companies that deserve it, not towards companies like Ubisoft that covet it. Like, what is their audience? Like, do they want pay piggies, right? Like, have the ESG money. I don't give a shit. Like, have the government grants. I don't give a shit. But what we're seeing is it's just not sustainable. They know this. Then people shit on them, and the consumer knows this. They know that the consumer knows that this is unsustainable. But it's this level of, again, corporate stubbornness that they just have to push, right? They have to defend themselves. Even though they put themselves in this situation. And that's the thing that boggles my mind. They put in time, money, and effort to get to this situation. And they're surprised that people are like, brother, what the fuck are you doing? You're not getting my money, kiss my ass. But anyway, that's all I gotta say about this. I mean, this should just be a good thing, you know, the consumer is winning, and hopefully other companies will figure this out. Or not, you know. We'll put our money towards other things. But anyway, see ya.